So Princess Anne is now sitting beside King Charles at the state banquet, and Camilla has been moved away from the center of the room, and the palace is trying to call this a routine protocol adjustment. But the timeline tells a completely different story. When you actually look at what was said versus what happened, this wasn't a scheduling conflict. This was a consequence. And the fact that the palace won't just say that outright is honestly more revealing than the seating change itself. Before we get into the details, if you're new here on Crown Watch, hit subscribe so you don't miss updates. Okay, so let's talk about why a chair matters this much. The most powerful signal inside a monarchy isn't always a speech or a crown or some grand decree. Sometimes it's literally a chair. And this week, as the final state banquet seating plan crossed the palace desks, one change sent a silent shock through the royal household. Queen Camilla was removed from King Charles's immediate side, and Princess Anne was placed beside him instead. Charles did not speak when the final card reached him. He read the names once, then again, like the paper had turned cold in his hands. A state banquet is a formal royal dinner held for visiting leaders, and inside palace life, it's never just about food or speeches. Every seat sends a message. Every position tells the world who is trusted, who is protected, and who is closest to power. That's why this change mattered. Anne hadn't been moved nearer to the king by accident. Camilla hadn't been moved away by confusion. The seating arrangement had become a declaration. Camilla received the update in private, and for a moment she didn't react at all. She held the note, eyes fixed on the line where her place should have been. The queen consort understood the wound beneath the wording. This wasn't a practical adjustment. This was proximity being taken, where proximity meant strength. She had stood beside Charles through judgment, through public scrutiny, through years of people questioning whether she belonged there, and now another woman would sit where the world expected her to be. Anne heard the news differently. No grand announcement came, no aide dressed it up with ceremony. One official stepped close and said, "Ma'am, His Majesty will require you at his side." She absorbed the sentence without triumph. The princess had spent a lifetime refusing drama, which honestly made the moment sharper. She didn't ask why Camilla had been moved. She didn't ask who approved it. She accepted the duty because Anne knew that when the crown calls, emotion waits outside. Then came the quiet gesture that made the decision feel final. An aide opened the rehearsal folder, removed Camilla's place card, and slid it beneath papers. No one raised a voice. No one needed to. Charles watched and understood that the palace had crossed a line it couldn't uncross. What looked like a small change had become a silent test of loyalty, and the king knew the answer would wound someone before the evening ended. Once that chair moved, everyone inside the palace began asking the same dangerous question. Who had become indispensable to the king, and who had quietly been pushed away? To the public, the banquet was supposed to be polished silver, diplomatic smiles, and royal tradition, but behind the doors, three people carried three very different storms. Charles needed steadiness, Camilla needed recognition, Anne needed nothing at all. And that last part, that's what made her the most dangerous figure in the room. The moment her name moved beside the king, the emotional balance of the palace changed. Charles felt the pressure before anyone said it aloud. He knew a state banquet wasn't simply dinner under chandeliers. It was a national performance where the monarchy showed visiting leaders, diplomats, and the watching public that the crown remained stable. Every gesture mattered. Every companion mattered. And for a king already carrying the weight of age, illness, family fracture, and public doubt, the person beside him had to look unshakable. He needed calm. He needed discipline. He needed someone who wouldn't pull the evening into private emotion. Camilla understood the danger of distance better than anyone. Her public place had always depended on being seen near Charles during the grandest royal moments, not because she lacked title, but because title alone was never enough for her. She needed the image. She needed the reassurance that the room still accepted her as the woman closest to the monarch. When that closeness shifted even slightly, it wasn't a small embarrassment. It was a warning. It told the palace that her position could still be measured, adjusted, and quietly reduced. Charles sat alone before the banquet briefing, staring at the protocol sheet like it had become a confession. Protocol was the rule book of royal order, the system that decides who stands where, walks first, sits closest, and carries the weight of public meaning. He saw Anne's name beside his and knew Camilla would feel the blow before the night even began. Yet he didn't cross it out. He didn't call the aide back. That silence became its own decision. Camilla's composure cracked in the smallest possible way. A dresser asked whether her jewels should match the king's table position, and for one painful second, the question hung in the room like a mistake no one dared correct. She answered softly that her position had changed. The words were controlled, but the hurt beneath them wasn't. She had survived years of judgment to stand beside Charles. And now Anne would occupy the place that spoke louder than any announcement. Anne didn't celebrate. She folded the revised schedule, placed it in her handbag, and prepared like duty had simply handed her another burden. A courtier noticed something even colder. Charles had been warned that the optics would be explosive, yet he still refused to reverse the arrangement. That meant the replacement wasn't sudden. It had roots, and those roots led back to a private trigger the palace had tried to bury. To understand why Anne was placed at the king's side, the story has to move backward to the moment Camilla lost something far more fragile than a seat: trust. Every royal rupture has a beginning, but not every beginning looks dramatic while it's happening. This one began at a private diplomatic reception 3 nights before the banquet, when a remark, a pause, and a closed door changed the temperature inside the palace. By the next morning, the seating plan was no longer a formality. It had become a message. Camilla didn't arrive that evening expecting a confrontation. She walked into the reception believing the order of the week was already understood and that her place beside Charles would remain untouched. But the trouble began with one question about the formal receiving line. That's the carefully arranged moment when royals greet important guests in a set order before an official event. It mattered because the receiving line tells visitors who represents the crown, who stands closest to the monarch, and who carries authority in the room. Anne answered first, quietly confirming that she would accompany Charles through part of the greeting sequence. Camilla cut across her before the sentence had settled. She said the king wouldn't need extra support because she would be there. The words sounded polished, but the meaning struck hard. It wasn't simply a disagreement over movement. It was a challenge in front of senior guests, and everyone who heard it understood the danger. Anne stayed still, but her silence sharpened. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't defend herself. She allowed the moment to expose itself. Charles watched the exchange and felt the room change around him. He knew the issue was no longer about comfort or custom. It had touched the deeper question of who could speak for the crown when pressure gathered around him. Later, he entered his study and closed the door before aides could follow. That detail mattered. Charles often leaned on officials during delicate moments, but this time he shut the world out. The wound had reached him personally because Camilla hadn't merely interrupted Anne. She had made uncertainty visible. By morning, the incident had entered the system. A private note from the reception was placed into the king's red box, which is the official dispatch container used to carry papers requiring the monarch's attention. The note summarized the breach in one phrase: a visible confusion of authority. Those 5 words changed everything. They turned a tense exchange into a royal problem. They gave the seating change a reason. They made Anne's new position beside Charles feel less like preference and more like correction. Camilla learned that the reception had become part of the decision, and her hurt turned colder. She didn't blame the aides. She didn't ask for the note to disappear. Instead, she asked for Anne directly because the Queen Consort understood that the battle had moved beyond paper. It had become personal, and someone would have to say aloud what the palace had already decided in silence. That request led to the confrontation the palace feared most. 2 royal women, 1 wounded king, and a truth no one could soften. The confrontation didn't happen in a ballroom or before cameras. It happened in a smaller room where the air felt heavier because there was nowhere to perform. Camilla entered, expecting explanation. Anne stood waiting with the stillness of someone who had already accepted the consequences. And Charles, caught between loyalty and monarchy, understood that whatever was said next couldn't be taken back. Camilla stepped into the private sitting room with her composure pulled tight, but the hurt had already reached her voice before she spoke. A private sitting room is one of the palace's quieter spaces, used for conversations too sensitive for offices and too personal for official chambers. This was a family wound being handled behind closed doors where rank couldn't fully protect anyone. Charles had allowed the meeting because he believed silence would make the injury deeper. He knew Camilla would feel punished, he knew Anne would feel accused, and he knew the crown had placed all 3 of them in a position where no answer could sound kind. Camilla looked at Anne and asked the question that had been building since the altered seating plan reached her. Was this your doing? The words were sharp, but the pain underneath them was sharper. She wasn't simply asking whether Anne wanted the chair beside Charles. She was asking whether Anne had allowed the palace to turn her into proof that Camilla could be moved aside. The Queen Consort had spent years fighting for legitimacy, yet in that room she felt the old uncertainty return, cold and humiliating. Anne didn't flinch. She didn't answer quickly. She allowed the accusation to settle, because rushing would have made it sound like guilt. Anne finally replied with a steadiness that made the decision so difficult to challenge. She told Camilla she had not asked for the chair, but she would not refuse the king if he needed calm beside him. That sentence cut deeper than denial because it carried no vanity. Anne wasn't claiming victory. She was accepting duty. Charles heard it and lowered his eyes because the truth was suddenly impossible to soften. He admitted the change had come after the reception incident raised concerns about discipline around him. Public discipline, in palace language, means the visible order and control that protects the monarch from appearing weak, confused, or divided. Camilla understood then that the decision wasn't about Anne replacing her socially. It was worse than that. Anne was being trusted, ceremonially, where Camilla no longer was. The chair beside Charles had become a test of reliability, and Camilla had discovered the result only after others had already judged it. Charles reached for his pen, paused and set it down with a quiet finality that made the whole room still. Then he said the seating would remain unchanged. That single pen striking the table became the sound of finality, but behind it stood a deeper force than personal preference. Royal power rarely announces itself loudly. It moves through protocol sheets, advisory notes, and the quiet language of precedents. By the time Camilla challenged the seating change, the machinery had already turned. Charles wasn't merely choosing between two women beside him. He was responding to a warning from the institution that had protected kings and queens long before this family wound open. Charles understood the danger of ignoring that warning. Palace protocol officials had looked at the banquet and seen more than a formal dinner. They saw a test of control. Protocol means the palace rule system that decides rank, order, seating, movement, and who appears closest to the monarch during official